Oh, your phone went to sleep.
Just great. So if you'd like to keep in touch with some of your fellow conference goers or people who couldn't attend for various reasons, join our XMPP channel, FOSS at chat.sfconservancy.org, or follow us on Mastodon and make your posts with photos and other interesting tidbits from the talks using the FOSSy25 hashtag.
If you've noticed the Sunday schedule, it's a little bit more casual. We're doing lightning talks in the main room during the morning. If you'd like to sign up for a lightning talk, there's a sign-up sheet on the registration desk. And then we're doing an unconference in the afternoon, some more casual conversations in the talk rooms. And we'll have sign-up sheets for that at the registration desk also. At our Lost and Found, we have 2 water bottles and 1 magnetic USB-C charger. So if that is yours, please stop by the registration desk. Also, if you'd like to buy an OpenWRT1, we have some here, and you can purchase them for cash or becoming a sustainer. They are $128 a piece, and you don't even have to wait for them to come in the mail. You can just take it home with you. One more note, if you leave out of any door, you will not be able to get back in. They will all lock behind you, so you will have to walk all the way around and come back through the front door or knock on the window, and maybe someone will let you in.
And as a reminder, FOSSy operates with a code of conduct. You can find it on the website. Please respect all your fellow attendees in all ways. Photography policy, take a look at folks' lanyards. If it's black, it's fine. If it's red, do not take their photo. And blue means ask, so just keep that in mind. We do have one change to the schedule. We have a cancellation for a speaker who couldn't attend, 5:30 p.m., sub judice, the era of packaging over in the Linux app ecosystem. So.
But this morning we have a keynote with Pono Takamori interviewing Alan Gunn called Assessing and Managing Threats to the Nonprofit Infrastructure of FOSS. So let's welcome them to the stage.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to grab Allison?
Oh, that needs to go.
Thank you. Hey there, Bono.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, Gunnar and I are going to talk about fiscal hosting in free and open source software this morning. We figured we'd talk about the most niche subject possible, and we hope that we can intrigue you to thinking more about governance and some larger nonprofit infrastructure issues, not just kind of the technical stuff. Yeah, so maybe we'll do quick introductions. So I'm Pono. I work for Software Freedom Conservancy. I do community organizing and a lot of other things over there. Deal a lot with our member projects. Yeah.
Right on. I'm Alan Gunn. Most folks know me as Gunner. I self-identify as recovering techie. I worked in Silicon Valley before being subsumed into the nonprofit industrial complex, and now I run a nonprofit called Aspiration. We are, in the terminology of the sector, a capacity builder, but in general, we just like to see ourselves as roadies that we help our allies try to rock, if you will indulge me in that analogy. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I think that leads great. Just for a quick definition for those aren't quite familiar about what fiscal hosting is. So everybody's used a free and open source project before and been like, hey, how do I give you money? And they go, well, you can buy me a beer the next time you see me, or you can send me a check. Turns out we've got a little bit more robust mechanisms than that for funding, and so we've come up with this idea of fiscal hosting. So we can be legal entities that projects can operate under. That's got a lot of benefits. So both the individual projects don't have to deal with the administrative overhead of legal issues, of money handling, of all these kind of things. But really, at the end of the day, it's a way for projects to leverage their small volunteer, mostly volunteer hours into larger impact. That's how we like to view fiscal sponsorship.
Right on. And we see it in a similar sense. To us, fiscal sponsorship is really trying to fill negative space and really complement what projects want to be able to do. There are those that just want to code. There are those that want to be in everything, and we try to be in the middle.
Yeah. I think that also comes to this idea of like, how do you choose a fiscal host? So you're a project, you're looking for a home, you want to work with people that your values align, that you trust, that have a good reputation. How does a project even kind of start to think about that kind of thing?
It's a good question. I think there's two parts to the answer. I think a project needs to be clear on what its larger strategy is. And I realize strategy is a fighting word when you just want to code, but understanding what roles a project wants to play, what roles a project wants to offload, and understanding how you want decision making to work in those two realms. I think you have to have those conversations. And then I think you want to understand the spectrum of fiscal hosting ideologies. We model it as a spectrum. At one end, the flamingly paternalistic, extractive, transactional fiscal hosting, often referred to as the hostage-taking model of fiscal hosting, where basically once you're in, you can't get out. Won't name names, but it happens every day in the open source world. And then at the other end, there's the real solidarity hosting, people that are values aligned, people that really see their role as being in support of you, not in control of you. And so I think situating yourself on a spectrum, understanding the benefits. And I guess my last thing I always tell people, we have this general guidance to projects when they're getting into things like fiscal hosting, is to use what we call the Hollywood marriage principle, which is otherwise known as prenup thinking. Everyone knows that every Hollywood marriage is guaranteed to end in divorce at some point in the future. So have the conversation up front about how you're going to divide the assets when it comes to an end. Many projects enter into fiscal hosting without making proper affordances for how intellectual property would be transferred later. Is there a risk of losing the intellectual property? Could they lose control of the license? So have the prenup conversation as you're deciding.
And that's a really easy thing to convince engineers to start thinking about this stuff while they're planning. I always like to joke that, engineers love to iterate. We write code, we push, we rinse, repeat. But we never think about that in terms of our governance. We never think about let's lay out some written governance. Let's think about this a little bit more systematically, which also, we're always trying to abstract. Why can't we do this a little bit more with social protocol? So being a little bit more deliberate in thinking about where you want to go, what are the goals of your projects and how do those align? And I think that's something that Aspiration and SFC both sort of agree with. We want to partner with our projects. We want to believe in them. We want to help them become the best that they can be. We don't want to be prescriptive about what kind of path we're taking going forward.
That's exactly right. And I think that said, our way of saying it is we try to let you be as autonomous as the man will let us let you be. And so we try to be very clear about the things where we do have to assert control and the classic one with a nonprofit. For those not familiar with the parlance of the nonprofit industrial complex, when you get your charitable status, when you're a C3 tax-deductible, grant-amenable entity, you have this charitable purpose, and it is a specific set of words, and anything you're hosting has to fit under that umbrella. And so, if you went and got established as a nonprofit to help dogs cross the street, that probably would limit you. But if you got a charitable purpose of helping living beings navigate in urban transit contexts, that gives you a much broader spectrum of things that you can take money for and do. And so we often get into that tension. And the classic one for us, I think you're in the same boat. We don't currently let folks do lobbying. We would love to, but life's too short to do all the reporting and compliance around lobbying.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also sort of one of the tensions that happen between a fiscal host and the sponsoree, the project, is we have these oftentimes charitable mission goals that we need to adhere to. And so communicating to projects, hey, so as a 501c3 in the US, we can't let you have paid keynotes. We can't let you have conferences where you're taking sponsorships and you're trading these kind of goods. And so there does exist this tension between, hey, we're just trying to raise money and do what's best for our project, but there is this kind of bureaucratic overhead. I know for me personally, that's been a bit of point of contention with some projects.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I've always got Bradley Kuhn in my head or on my shoulder as I talk about this. But the other issue is with open source, the IRS is neurotic. You can quote me on that. About not letting people make money off charitable dollars. So if a grant comes into your nonprofit and some private party benefits, that is prohibited private benefit. And open source is complicated that way, because it's out there on GitLab or wherever, and some for-profit actor could take your code and make some money off it. And so there's a real art to navigating open project hosting to make sure that everybody understands that fine line. And the classic thing we've run up against, people who want to have their private consultancy aside from our hosting, we love you, but you can't be doing that, because if you're building equity in a private company that's based on the code you're getting charitable funding to build, we got a problem.
Right. And that's really one of the tensions that fiscal hosting can try to help with is, hey, how are corporations using your free projects that you have the best intentions for generating digital public infrastructure, but now that's been leveraged by, I don't know what the current 5-letter acronym is for those companies, but such a company.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think one of the other points we make in this regard, there's the dance of not crossing any compliance lines. There's also the notion that you actually need a threat model for success. If your stuff is out there and you're fiscally hosted and it takes off, you suddenly become firmware in a Chromebook, for instance. You need to ask, is your fiscal host ready to grow with you? Or put differently, have you put in place exception handling so that you know what you're going to do if suddenly the dollar volume goes up a 0 or 2, or the number of transactions you need to do, contracts, donations, whatever, jumps up an order of magnitude. And so many projects are just in the mode of, can I offload this accounting to you? And we try to get them to understand that, no, this could go bigger than that. You should have that conversation as you're getting started.
Yeah, totally. And then also, not everything can be for everyone. We were really lucky to work with Godot, a really great game engine, free software game engine, and they grew sort of outsized what we could provide. So we helped them graduate to a Dutch nonprofit, and that was a great process for us to go to, because our relationship worked while it did, and it works even to this day when they're not with us anymore. So what does like the life cycle of a project look like with a fiscal host?
Yeah, I think that depends on the fiscal host. I was joking with Pano earlier this morning. We look at it as we're parents that are very open to our kids living with us into middle age. So there's some fiscal hosts that are like, oh, you need to graduate within 2 years. We have that same threshold issue. And so just to name names, we are extremely proud to be hosting a project called AI Now, who I think are saying some of the smartest things on AI policy and sort of the interplay between AI and a bunch of social justice and racial justice issues. They're just doing business at a volume we can't meet their needs. They are just kicking butt and taking names. And so they decided, I guess about 1.5 years ago, they needed to spin out. And so we're now raising our game on spinning people out. But our general philosophy is, if we're meeting your needs, we're happy to have you stick around, because we view our network of projects as an ecosystem where we can create lateral benefit and help them have sort of the whole greater than the sum of the parts, in that we can coordinate things they don't want to coordinate.
Yeah, that's being able to share skills with your project, and sort of the bidirectional relationship is something that I think is great, because as much as I've joked about sort of, engineers not wanting to do governance, there's definitely been play of, hey, I'd love to talk about governance with a project, but they've actually got some pretty interesting ideas and a really long history. So it's like really a privilege to work with, 20, 25-year-old free software projects that have gone through all of these changes, multi-generations of people, and what does that look like bringing new people in, kind of offloading other people. Yeah, that's been an unexpected joy of doing fiscal hosting.
Yeah, it really has. And I think the other, if I can keep, I'm a non-parent who overuses parenting analogies, but I think the parenting privilege of having that look ahead where you've seen a kid fall down and scrape their knee in this particular park, it's nice to be able to sort of be a couple steps out ahead of projects who are passionate about their code or passionate about their mission, and sort of say, oh, you might want to be thinking about this before you go to school next month. And it really does, it makes us wiser to see when our advice is good and when our advice is less on point, and to really help them sort of do that sort of horizon-oriented threat modeling.
Yeah. So you mentioned threat modeling. I know that's something that you really, really like to think about.
Threat model boy.
So what is this kind of framework lens to projects, to fiscal hosts? How do you like to provide that insight for projects?
So I think, the other thing, speaking again as a recovering techie, I think there is a certain form of optimism when you code that eventually code will run. We can debate that at the happy hour later. But in general, we like to encourage people to assume everything is going to break. And so right up front to be modeling what's going to go wrong. And so I think there's threat modeling at the fiscal host level. And again, the prenup stuff I already talked about. I think projects don't think enough about pretty obvious things like single points of failure. There's that phrase, the bus factor, and if someone gets displaced by a bus, how much trouble is your project in? And so I think threat modeling as a project early on, really important. And then I think you go up a couple levels. The funding landscape right now, Nobody, I don't think anybody saw, at least not anybody in the nonprofit landscape, saw the dramatic cuts in foreign aid that were going to happen at the start of this year in the US. The domino effect in terms of a lot of the traditional funders of open source projects needing to double down on support existing projects that lost other funding sources and so forth. While you can't predict the future, you should have a plan B on revenue. As annoying as that is, people are like, oh, we got the bills paid for a year, we just want code. Nope, actually probably good to assume that money is either going to evaporate and or get spent faster than you think. And then there's ecosystem level stuff. And we see that from time to time in different ways. Supply chain attack type things where you're like, will our reputation be savaged by virtue of the fact that we are implicated? But I think in general, applying a non-optimistic lens to the work so that you can then focus more on the work later, that's what we advocate.
Yeah, it's a great working relationship because we can think about that stuff and we can lend our guidance to you, and then we're freeing you up to do more technical work. One thing you mentioned that I think is a really good point to highlight is sort of us as nonprofits existing in this overall nonprofit infrastructure that is sort of under attack in some ways. We're seeing increasing challenges to funding. We're seeing sort of challenges that nonprofits have to even existing. How do you see organizations handling that, and what do you see as sort of some of the points to keep our heads above water and like stay hopeful about it?
Yeah, and here I'm channeling our wonderful lawyer Gene Takagi, but and also Ben Weisner at ACLU. I can't say enough nice things about Ben Weisner and the ACLU. The boring answer: compliance, compliance, compliance. And so one of the threat vectors that most people have identified for the nonprofit sector is that the easiest way to get tapped on the shoulder, lose your C3 status, is to not be in compliance, to not have had all the audits, to not have filed all the forms, and so forth. And so I have developed a rather perverse passion for compliance over the last couple of years, especially in the last 6 months. And then I think from there, there's also just the notion of thinking about what is your visibility and how do you navigate that? Because I come from a radical anarchist background. I was proud to be an arrested troublemaker back in the day. And one of the things that I've wrestled with in the last few years is getting quieter as a fiscal host, because it's not our place to make a lot of noise. Because as we discussed earlier, we model our hosting. It's a tired but useful analogy. To us, fiscal hosting is not unlike being the building admin in an apartment building. And you have these responsibilities to think about the collective well-being of everybody in the building, not just what you think ought to go on in the building, though I've met those apartment admins that didn't see it that way. And so we really try to be mindful of this idea that as you're sort of stewarding all this, what is your visibility and how do you make sure that you're not becoming the story in a way that hurts your projects?
And that's also great advice just to stay on mission. As with charitable mission goals, it's a good way to focus on the mission work and to really, like, at least in our case, really put forth the ideas of software freedom and advocate for those and make sure that we're doing the work and that speaks for itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing we try to, the thing that we bring, and I think we always look up to SFC around values of freedom and sort of general openness. We aspire to much of the same and try to get our projects to have that sense of what is your accountability to your quote unquote users. We have projects that don't have, truly speaking, users, but so much of, I think, the values that are in free and open software around the four freedoms, around all of the empowerment that comes from freedom and openness, we try to generalize that to a broader set of values around the way that you implement your mission.
Yeah. I think that's also one of the really cool parts about working in free software as a fiscal host is sort of seeing the landscape of projects. You know, there's projects like Reproducible Builds. You should go visit their table back there. They're doing very great work sort of doing supply chain security. And you've got that end, and then you've got projects that are doing more advocacy. You've got projects like at SFC, Inkscape, who's making sure that you another 5-letter word for a company that you can keep your files and you can do all of your design work and keep it open. And seeing the spread of projects for me has at least been really like empowering and motivating to know that each of us working in our own sort of corners, we are building something together.
Yeah. And I think in a perfect world, we would do the work to basically create some sort of a navigation framework, a decision tree, if you will. Because I have this conversation over and over again explaining, because if there's a free or open source project, we almost always say, call you guys. And you all have good discipline about saying, oh, we're focusing. But in general, we think we're not specialists in hosting open technology. We host it. We've got some projects like the Collaborative Knowledge Foundation and Open Referral that we're proud to host. But part of what we try to do is refer out. So Superbloom is another really compelling fiscal host here in the US. They're focused on design and digital security. And so for projects where design or digital security is central, we like to route to them. Code for Science and Society, another phenomenal fiscal host. And so I think a lot of what we still need to do is create sort of a navigation framework for values-aligned fiscal hosts. And certainly on my to-do list for this year, we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of like we were talking about earlier, sort of challenges for projects that are trying to figure out a home and navigating the relationship with existing. There have been some projects about choosing licenses and choosing foundations, but choosing a fiscal host is sort of this weird kind of in-between space that's sort of where we're all working our muscles and building out to sort of better navigate and prepare projects for.
Yeah, and we've started an interesting offering that I'm enjoying. It's a little bit voyeuristic, but we do pro bono review of your fiscal agreement if you're not going with us. And so when we send people away, we're like, oh, if you want us to look at your fiscal sponsorship agreement before you sign, we'll help you do that. Because a lot of them have inadequate IP clauses. A lot of them have really missing components because some fiscal hosts just don't think in terms of open and free software licensing. And so we love to sort of be that layer of sort of fallback as well.
Yeah, yeah, and that also is one of the really like key reasons that you would even choose a fiscal host is getting some kind of legal support. And I think that kind of like really touches on this big issue with projects is sort of what's the difference between a service provider. You know, I love to just pay a SaaS provider to run the thing for me, and I don't have to think of it anymore. We're all used to doing this, but sort of it's fundamentally different, and we want to do more relationship building with our projects. So how do you communicate to projects that that's what we're doing, and it's not you're paying us a service fee to get these things in return?
Yeah, it's a great question and an ongoing tension, but we just get explicit about the fact that there are two tranches. And so we are explicitly transactional around the operational stuff. You're paying us a percentage. If you're fully hosted, the default rate is 10%, but we like to do sliding scale. And the idea there is for that 10%, we're going to do your accounting as well as we can, including monthly reporting. We're going to do your HR. We're going to do your contracting, accounts payable, accounts receivable, legal referral, and so forth. And so we try very hard to make it very clear that for that rate, you get these services. But then we offer a bunch of what I might call soft services for which there is no charge. And so we are blessed. A miracle from the outer space is that we have an in-house full-time fundraising mentor, Jeffrey McDougall, VP of fundraising at Mozilla back in the day, VP of fundraising at Consumer Reports. Jeffrey came to us and said, I want to join this project. And he is available to mentor any of our projects on fundraising. And he's good. He really helps projects to claim their power and understand they don't need to beg for money if they're going for instance, grant funding. But then I help with strategy, product development, organizational development, which, if I may offer loving critique, far too many hosted projects don't ever think about organizational development. Succession planning, what does it look like if somebody gets sick or has a baby? Just a bunch of pretty predictable outcomes that happen, and then people are like, oops, we should have thought of this. And the last column, and again, I'm so sad as an operations nerd, we offer full finance mentoring. So if you want to learn how to budget, if you want to learn how to do accounting, if you want to learn how to do contracting, we do all of that pro bono. That's not baked into the rate. It's all on demand. But again, you would be shocked. It's like telling people, hey, come on over and I'll teach you advanced skills in dental flossing. It does not sell as well as you might hope it did.
Yeah, yeah, and they're great resources, and projects need to practice working those muscles. And I think that it's sort of having that low-hanging fruit that people can go after and work those muscles to grow their projects. Because I think that there is the sort of live-at-home kind of Peter Pan syndrome, I think you called it earlier, about staying at home. But also a lot of projects, the horizons are really wide, and so kind of showing a path that they can grow. It's kind of one of the neat things. You know, we've had a lot of projects that have come through that I mentioned Godot earlier that has graduated, but other projects have been with us and stayed roughly the same size, grown and shrunk, and sort of what's good for one project is not what's good for another. And so sort of understanding that all your children are different and have different needs that's also been a key learning point.
Yeah, and as long as we're continuing to overuse this parenting metaphor, we do something that I really enjoy. So one of the issues that we have wrestled with, and I have never talked to you about this, but one of the challenges of fiscal hosting when you do a decent number of projects is staff burnout burnout in your organization because you're asking your staff to context switch on a regular basis. It's like, oh, this is a high stress contract for project 11. Oh, this is a high priority invoice for project 43. And so we are very mindful. We are very clear with our projects that the only way to operate is with patience and niceness. And if you can't roll that way, you're always welcome to yell at me, but you're never welcome to yell at anybody else on the team. So we do this sort of good parent, bad parent thing where everybody who's not named Gunner, we try to be as warm and as supportive. And I'm sure you've seen this movie before. Hey, I just found out about a grant. It's due at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Could you all get this paperwork together tonight?
I'm getting flashbacks.
And you're like, wow, okay, this is like the college application that's due tomorrow. And so I, as a parent, am morally obligated to feel like I need to pull an all-nighter with you. And so our model is to basically really let the staff politely put down the boundaries and then escalate to me if there's a need to do that. And the idea is we make people aware that we trust them. The language we use, and I'm not sure my lawyer would like this, but we say to projects, we want you to be as autonomous and independent and feel like your own organization as the IRS will legally allow us to be. And oh, by the way, we will tap you on the shoulder when you stray outside that boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for a lot of projects, I wouldn't say pushing boundaries, but I would say not sort of even understanding what the legal framework they operate under. And so that
Or
kind
caring.
of or caring. Well, there's some or caring. So that expectation setting when projects are coming in, I think is one of the harder conversations. But it's like if you work those muscles up front, then it's sort of going to be easier later. You know, if we're thinking about governance, if we're thinking about succession planning, if we're thinking about what are our legal obligations as a sponsored project under a 501c3, then we can save ourselves a lot of like pain down the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think in doing that, I think one of the things we tell projects, and again, this is counterintuitive to people who think in lines of code, and again, not to be patronizing, I'm that person. One of the things we try to get projects to understand is one of the most powerful superpowers you can develop is storytelling. And what we mean by storytelling is if you want people to support your project, participate in your project, believe in your project, it's not about how good your code is. It's not about which license you're running. It's about telling a story of what is the opportunity or problem or need we exist to address. What is our vision for addressing that problem, need, or opportunity? How are we doing it? And how can you participate or contribute? And the more that everyone in your project that has any external facing role can tell that story, everything goes better because it is both a harmonizing mechanism for your team, your network, whatever is your noun of connectedness in your project, but it's also a way of really making sure the outside world has a consistent understanding of who you are and what you stand for.
Yeah, it's one of those, so-called soft skills that really helps round out teams. It builds that internal cohesion because you're all on the same page using the same language, but also for grant writing, for convincing other people that it's a good idea. I think that, it's 2025. We've moved beyond the idea that just because it's the best technology, it's the one that's going to succeed. How do we communicate that to people? How do we let people understand that sort of the digital public infrastructure that we're building is for the greater good? We can't just say, I wrote a really great IPv6 such and such, right? Like that's not going to be enough these days. So storytelling, I think, is an incredibly underrated part, especially coming from an engineering background. It's like, well, who cares if my chef cookbook didn't have a good story behind it? We can think a little bit more abstractly about the work that we're doing.
Exactly. And one of the very simple rubrics we try to emphasize, and again, I learned this the hard way because I was on the other side of this for probably 25 years, but teaching projects when they communicate the difference between features and benefits is one of the most powerful distinctions that you can give to people that are speaking. Because someone will be like, oh, it has full X.27777 support and blank stare from the other side. But if you say, oh, this gets you out of jail free and makes meals for you all the time, oh, I'm glad you have that support in your product. And so giving people that sense that there is a benefit to them and an impact in the way they do whatever they need to do. Just teaching projects that the shorthand of features is infinitely less impactful than the longhand of benefits. To me, that's a lesson I never get tired of sharing.
One talk I was at recently had mentioned sort of a way to connect with Gen Z better. And in my graying hair, I'm trying to better learn those lessons. But one thing that struck me that they said that they've had a lot of luck with was making videos, talking to people. Instead of a readme.txt, we're making 30-second videos. And I think that these are the kind of experimentations and lessons that we can learn between projects and we can share and we can sort of experiment and figure out what's working for different projects.
Yeah. And I would love, I mean, if anyone has interest, an open source storytelling workshop is something Aspiration would host in a New York Minute, because I feel like these are the soft arts that I jokingly use this phrase world domination, because to me, we should be thinking that way in a lot of different ways. But in terms of free and open technology, let's make some clumsy, sweeping and generalization, surveillance. It's getting worse all the time. Devices that make you ask permission to install software. I know this crowd doesn't need any convincing that's a problem. And so to me, if we are going to rally larger networks, larger movements, larger scales of people to care about these issues, we've got to be telling this as, if I may, battle versus good and evil, power to the people, and just other things that are fundamentally touching at the human existence, and not just at the fact that this has just been ported to Rust and is now formally verified.
Yeah, I think that also sort of brings us back to the idea of sort of the nonprofit infrastructure is in a lot of ways facing a lot of challenges. And so we are sort of seeing this bifurcation between projects that had it good and projects that didn't, and we don't want to see them sort of continue going on their paths. So how do we open up those communication channels? How do we build the storytelling methods so that we can, in these times of need, sort of support each other?
It's a great question. I think I would answer, and to me, it's about projects having conversations about roles. And let's put projects on a spectrum. There is project of one, the person who does all the things. Then it's just a question of, do you talk to yourself in various parts of your day? But if you are an actual project of multiple people, who takes what role on? And having that conversation, I can't overstate how that doesn't happen enough. And especially when you self-identify as engineer, that tends to blur what you're actually doing. And I am a hopeless fanboy, self-identified roadie for the Reproducible Builds project, but props to them, because they are very clear, team member to team member on the core team, about roles, who's on point for what, when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to communication, when it comes to governance. And they have those conversations proactively, and I've learned a lot from watching them do that first. And I just think those are things that projects can do, so that somebody knows it might be on them to think about being the storyteller. Because I believe everybody needs to be able to tell the story, but somebody needs to bottom line the bootstrapping process of getting that story agreed upon.
Right. There's a lot of labor to be done in a household, and when somebody can't do it, you need to make sure everybody can do every chore in the house. And that's, something that we've made a lot of strides in, being specialized. But I think that we are kind of coming back in terms of what are the non-technical ways that we can support each other, even within our project.
Exactly. And the other one that I think, the thing that makes me saddest in many ways about the nonprofit sector is the scarcity mindset. And by that, if you've lived in nonprofit swamps, there is just this really unfortunate sort of snarking and backbiting and sort of saying why somebody else's, their mission is wrong. And I think that, to me, I realize that there are many egos and many competing agendas and many competing licenses in the free and open source universe. But I believe an act of solidarity that we all need to do better is talking up each other's free and open source projects. I believe that if we really want to make this make sense outside of those of us that are already converted, we need to talk about this as a holistic thing, as opposed to, they're running on the wrong version of PHP. And so that kind of, othering of other projects. On the one hand, I can tell you some projects I'm happy to other, but in general, I believe that if there's values alignment, if we're all fighting on the same side, let's not get broken up about licenses or stacks. Let's see that we're all fighting for a larger, greater good, user empowerment, freedom, onward.
Yeah, totally. I think especially that's just one of the tactics of empire. That's a way that we're divided in times of need, that when we're not lifting each other up and providing a robust support network, that's when projects are going to fall and disappear during these times when if we're lifting each other up, a rising tide is lifting all boats. So I think it's a really good point. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts? I think that for me, I'm really looking towards, like, what is the next 5 years as projects are doing these kind of succession planning? These projects are looking for funding in an increasingly drying up landscape. What are you telling projects? What are you thinking about to keep yourself hopeful in these trying times?
Well, I think the most mundane things I tell people is stick to the work. You need to threat model. You need to imagine other possibilities. But at the end of the day, being productive is its own sort of balm and its own sort of therapy to the degree that you're able. And I say that not to be disrespectful to people that are actually inhibited from doing their coding, for instance, because they're in jail. And so that said, I think that beyond that, there's also this notion that I believe we could be doing a better job of articulating. I came along in the computer science, sort of history line. Design patterns arrived just about the time I was learning how to code. And so I look at the world in design patterns. I feel like as fiscal sponsors and fiscal hosts, we could be doing a better job of articulating design patterns for the ways in which organizations both think about roles and governance, but also the way that they think about evolving. And so that's certainly something that we do. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, I look out at a room like this. I think the most important thing for us to do, regardless of our politics, regardless of our licenses, is to be together. If you want a clumsy critique of capitalism that I think is true, capitalism at scale is the act of isolating every one of us, getting us each in a separate room with our own separate large screen TV, our own 2-liter bottle of corporate sugar water, basically to maximize consumption. And it is in the act of being collectively together that we find, I think, healing and solidarity in very disorienting times. The planet, last time I noticed, was continuing to die or otherwise transform in ways where we might die. And so I think it's just really powerful to be together and realize that we're not alone. And I think that's part of why I love free and open source software, is it creates so many places where people can plug in, join, and become part of something.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that connecting to other parts of the world and what's going on is really important. I think for me, as over 20-year vegetarian, free software, I've always wrestled with what is my heart getting at that my ethics are sort of stumbling through. But this way to connect. Oh, hey, maybe core boot is this way I can keep using software or keep using hardware after its lifetime. There are these indirect ways that we're able to bring people into our movement, and I'm really looking forward to younger people growing up in a world without binaries. They don't know that we used to be able to buy software and just own it, and it ran for a while. But what does the world look like in this world of SaaS? They're logging into websites, they're using things, and they're changing transparently, and that's just the world of software that they've come to know. They're sort of getting hip to this idea of the world could be different than the one we grew up in. And so how do we connect with them? How do we bring in new people? As I'm getting older, I'm really looking forward to what are the ways I can connect with people to continue my passion in free software, and listen to them and bring their ideas in, rather than being prescriptive of I got an old computer and I installed Linux and that was my story. That doesn't have to be everybody's story. I think that we all grew up with similar backgrounds, and so it's very exciting to be able to look to the future, and connect these projects for people.
I agree. And I think as you were speaking, one of the notions that I often bring up, what is the gateway tool? What can you connect someone with that lets the light bulb go off? I was just having the privilege of talking to the F-Droid team a couple of days ago. Love F-Droid. Look them up if you don't know them. But they're getting people to fundamentally rethink the idea that you have to ask permission from the Apple App Store or Google Play to install an app on your phone. And they're just doing brilliant work. And part of why I love them is that they're thinking strategically about how to use European policy advances, the Digital Market and Digital Services Act, to continue to sort of wedge their way into being a part of people realizing they have freedom even on a proprietary mobile device.
Yeah. Just continuing to do the good work and push things forward, and that's hopeful. It's not just wallowing. I really like the phrase that I've heard, that despair is a tool of empire. This is something that powers are using to keep us down, and we can think a little bit more creatively about the ways that we're resisting. And one of that ways is community networking and being able to be in person at events like this. So, maybe we've got some time for questions if we want to do that for a little bit.
Please.
Can I pass a mic and then somebody can run it? Tracy, can I bother you to run a mic?
For those who work in corporations or know people who work in corporations, there are often programs that allow you to volunteer time in exchange for corporate dollars to donate to your favorite 501c3. So if you belong to one or you know of people who belong to them, getting those 501c3 open source projects into that system is a great way not just to be able to donate your own dollars, which many corporations have matching funds for if you're donating to a 501c3, but also do volunteer work for those 501c3 organizations and then earn extra donation dollars from your company to then give back to the open source ecosystem. So just a creative idea.
I think we can do one more question. Yep.
Rosie.
Hi, y'all. So good to see you in Portland this morning. I have so many questions for you, but since I only get one. So given the lack of funding and the reduction of funding that's happening across all sectors, there is kind of a push right now in humanitarian and other efforts for nonprofits to kind of combine functions, like rather than having 3 different nonprofits that are doing really similar things, all trying to support their administrative staff, like how can they work together? And I'm curious if you're seeing any trends like that in free and open source software projects, or if you have thoughts or recommendations around that.
Yeah, I think one is sort of just what does digital infrastructure matter in this world that funding is drying up for humanitarian orgs? I mean, like that's an existential question that I wrestle with every day. I think that fiscal hosts provide a unique opportunity to support that kind of work because what we can say is if you join us, then we can sort of share the administrative overhead of doing these things. And even to Ria's point, sort of acting as these vessels to take in money, maybe that's an opportunity to sort of spread the wealth of the things that we're good at to projects that don't have a home but are doing critical work. One thought.
I agree with that. I would say, and this is me snarking about funders in general, I think a lot of that is sort of wishful thinking in that I think the idea of any 2 NGOs merging immediately makes my brain melt. It's kind of like suggesting that the loudest guitarist and the loudest drummer become roommates and they play a different kind of music. It will not go well. I think different missions, different visions, different cultural norms and values, it just seems like not the right approach, and it seems very funder initiated. I don't hear a lot of nonprofits being like, we need to merge. And so I really think there's a much harder conversation about what is the right place in the hierarchy of needs to intervene, because I think structurally it's almost guaranteed to go wrong. It needs to be spiritually.
Well, thank you, Gunnar, for having this conversation, and thanks everyone for listening. So we've got one more thing to do. Today, we're going to be presenting an award to someone. So Software Freedom Conservancy is really proud this is the inaugural year of the Distinguished Service Award in Software Freedom. And I feel really lucky to be able to present this award. This is somebody whose work has been demonstrated over so many years. They've helped the community both in helping people, in mentoring students, in mentoring community members, in providing technical infrastructure. If you're like me, you used to grab these packages from a Debian mirror from down the highway in Corvallis. You've definitely received an email from a Mailman 2 installation that lives in the data center. So many students here today came up through the program, and so I'm really happy to announce that Lance Albertson is receiving the inaugural award for Distinguished Service in Software Freedom. Tracy made this incredibly awesome laser cut award with free software.
Free hardware, too.
Yeah, Lance, could you share some words?
Yeah, I'm just surprised and very thankful. I've been doing this for a very long time, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces that have gone through my program that are sitting out there in the audience. I know earlier this year I had a little bit of a scare with funding and continuing to do this. Thankfully, we were able to get it going for another year, but that's still ongoing to try to keep it going beyond that. So keep the word out. We're still trying to find funding to kind of go beyond a year. And I'm also dealing with a data center move as well, which will be even more fun. So I just hired a new set of 4 students that are doing amazing. And it's exciting to kind of see this cycle over and over every year and kind of see where people go. So thank you.
As one of the many students that came up under Lance, it was such a pleasure to work in the lab. I think I didn't even study computer science at Oregon State, but it was very the education that I got coming through was so incredible. He hosts cohorts of students, and so it's really nice to come up with students a little bit older than you, nerds like to flex, so they would always show off their cool shell prompts. They would always show off their cool screen bindings and flashy things on their computers. But it was such an like encouraging and like just wonderfully inspiring place to come up, to learn how to work in free software, to learn to work in the open, to work with like really high profile projects. My first job out of college was with the Apache Software Foundation, and I got that directly because of Result with working with the lab. And so I encourage you all to like look up the OSL, to talk to people. There's a lot of people here today that have come through the program or continue to work with them. And I'm just so happy that we could recognize your great work. So thank you very much. I think we've got a quick break, so if you want to grab a cup of coffee or a snack before we head into the sessions for the day. So thank you, everyone. We're so glad you're here, and have a great day.